Welcome back to the Druber Health Podcast, everyone. It's been pretty cool. I had somebody reach out to me after this last episode saying that they switched their cooking oil to avocado oil. So that's awesome. I'm super excited to hear about some of these changes you guys are making. So keep them coming. If you've made some changes in your diet already, please let me know. I'd love to hear it. That being said, today we are going to focus on a couple different things. Figured I would give you guys a look into what a day of eating might look like for me. So we're going to call it Monday meals. We're going to go over what I had for meals on Monday this week, or just food in general. And then we're going to talk about oxalates, which is another anti-nutrient. So we'll take a deep dive on that one. Let's take a look at my Monday meals first, though. So I started off my day with a large bowl of yogurt. So I typically do like a 4-to-1 ratio of Stonyfield Greek organic grass-fed whole milk yogurt to Tremona grass-fed organic Bulgarian whole milk yogurt. So the difference between those two is the Greek yogurt has a lot more protein and it's thicker. I like my yogurt in general to be a little bit thicker, but I still wanted to get some of the texture from the Bulgarian whole milk yogurt. It also has some vanilla extract flavoring in there, so it adds a little bit of flavor to the yogurt mix. After I combine the yogurts, then I mix in a handful of organic blueberries or organic fruits, but blueberries are my favorite. Then you'd pour some organic maple syrup in there, and then I do 500 milligrams of magnesium citrate, and then 1,000 milligrams of Vital Proteins grass-fed pasture-raised collagen peptides, and just the plain stuff, so unflavored. And most of this stuff was found at Woodman's, which is a local grocery store here in Green Bay area. They actually do have a lot of like organic and healthy options there, which is awesome, and you can find some pretty good deals. So that was my first meal. Typically, I'll do that right away, and then I'll get into some sort of either work or some sort of physical activity just to kind of start my day off. For lunch, I cooked up some organic nitrate-free bacon, an omelet containing 2 organic pasture-raised chicken eggs, some ground beef heart, whole milk cheese, and ancient sea salt from the brand Redmond. And then I also cooked an organic grass-fed flat iron steak that I found on sale. Not a huge fan of flat iron steak, but because it was such a good price, I figured I'd hop on it. The beef, pork, and eggs were sourced from Wasita Farms Market, which is a local market here in De Pere. They have a farm that's actually based up in Door County. So they have a kind of like a market location up in Door County, and then they have the market location down here in De Pere. Now, I do all of my cooking either on a cast iron griddle or a stainless steel pan. So I've got 2 bigger stainless steel pans that I can use, and then I've got the cast iron griddle if I'm doing like stovetop stuff. Now, with the cast iron griddle, the cast iron was seasoned with some unknown oil when I bought it, so I unseasoned it, so basically I had to do like a lot of scraping and removal of it, and then I was able to reseason, and it's been a combination of reseasoning with avocado oil, 0 acre oil, and then I've also been using beef tallow just to make it a healthier oil on top. So it is stick-free or non-stick, so that's pretty awesome too. You don't have to worry about my eggs. I can cook eggs easily on this cast iron. I know some people complain about that, but I haven't had any issues. I do all of my omelets on that cast iron griddle. And the reason that I use cast iron and stainless steel is just to avoid, so typically any of the pots or pans that are marketed as like non-stick, they have a bunch of toxic additives to the surface to make it nonstick, but that is also getting passed on to your food. So in order to avoid that, I just go straight up stainless steel or cast iron, and that is going to be the safest regarding contamination from certain chemicals and materials. So basically, grinding up beef heart is an easy way for me to pack a bunch of nutrients into normal ground beef meats. So a lot of times I like to throw it in there with like ground beef meat for tacos or chili or something like that. But I found that the ground meat heart, honestly cooked up, tastes very similar to ground beef, so it was just an easy way for me to just add it into the omelet. I like adding meats into my omelets anyways, so it's been a really awesome addition for me. Now, liver, on the other hand, is very strong and has a pungent flavor, so most people prefer to stay away from that one. I like to get my liver in, but it's not like something that's constantly in my diet. I feel like heart is very easy for me to supplement in consistently just because of the flavor aspect. A little bit later in the afternoon, I met Maggie at Odyssey for some rock climbing. And then on the way home, I immediately started drinking from my 32-ounce mason jar filled with grass-fed A2 protein raw milk. That way I was able to get in carbs, fats, and protein and important micronutrients right away after my climbing workout. So after exercise, our bodies are able to utilize carbohydrates most efficiently. So I'm always mindful of making sure a majority of my carbohydrates are consumed after working out. Now, protein consumption is not as time sensitive in our bodies as like carbohydrate consumption because our bodies are just able to hold on to the proteins more efficiently and then use them for cell and muscle repair once we have like fueled ourselves appropriately with carbohydrates. So just to give you guys an idea on like carbohydrates and sugars, so simple sugars are going to be sugar molecules that are easy for our bodies to convert into ATP. So that's going to be like sugars from fruit or honey. And then like complex sugars, those need to be broken down quite a bit in our bodies before we're able to actually utilize them to create ATP. And those are like starches and grains typically. Now, moving on to, let's talk about the macros in that 32-ounce jar of milk. So basically, from consuming that jar of milk, I got roughly 48 grams of carbohydrates, 52 to 58 grams of fat, and 40 grams of protein, which is pretty awesome. All of that packed into one drink, no additives, that's just straight up raw milk. Now, lactose is the primary carbohydrate in cow's milk, and it is made from one molecule each of glucose and galactose, and those are simple sugars. So people with lactose intolerance do not make the enzymes or the enzyme lactase, and they cannot digest milk sugar typically. However, so raw milk has its lactose digesting lactobacilli bacteria intact because it forgoes the pasteurization process. When milk is pasteurized, it's heated to a certain temperature, killing the bacteria. So people who are unable to digest lactose on their own due to their gut microbiome not containing those bacteria, they typically can digest lactose when they are drinking raw milk. So raw milk is, honestly, it's kind of a super drink, and I treat it like that. Definitely, like I mentioned before in previous podcasts, milk is my go-to drink, and I hope to be able to continue drinking it for life. All right, moving on to dinner. I peeled, boiled, and mashed organic russet potatoes. So definitely a fan of removing the peel. That way you can, get rid of some of the phytic acid and other anti-nutrients which would typically be found in there. And then by boiling for an extended period of time, that's also a good way to get rid of those anti-nutrients as well. So I also soaked 6 organic pasture-raised chicken breasts for a couple of hours and then baked them in the oven that way. By soaking them, they actually are juicy throughout the cooking process. They don't get dried out, so that's pretty nice. I used beef tallow to coat the pan, and then I drizzled some 0-acre cultured oil on top of the chicken breasts along with some seasoning just to make the seasoning stick. And once the potatoes and chicken were ready to eat, I dumped a bunch of butter on the mashed potatoes and enjoyed about 3/4 of a large chicken breast. So when I was also, cooking and preparing the mashed potatoes, I did use a little bit of that ancient sea salt, that Redmond brand, and then I used about half a stick of grass-fed butter, mixed it in there while it was warm. So lots of butter. Fat will help people in general just digest starches more easily. So that's a good way to, it's good to make sure that you are mixing in those saturated fats, healthy saturated fats, in with your starch consumption. Before bed, I filled a large glass with a little kefir, that I found at Woodman's. And I use like the highest fat percentage one, plain, so it doesn't have any of the additives. I used a little grass-fed half and half, which is Organic Valley brand, just to get a little bit higher fat content. And then the rest of it was mostly raw milk that I had, and I drank that with my supplements consisting of beef organ pills, and then I have a vitamin D3 pill that contains avocado oil instead of other seed oils. I started looking at vitamin D3 pills in their ingredient lists about 2 years ago, and I noticed that most of them are using like a sunflower oil or something like that. I'm like, I'm getting a seed oil from my D3 pill. I had no idea that was in there, so that was interesting. But I did find a brand that used avocado oil instead, so that was pretty awesome. If you guys are interested in knowing that brand, let me know, and I will give you the deets on that one. So that's a look into my meals on Monday. I honestly might make this a reoccurring thing if people are enjoying it. So you can stay tuned on that one. Now, we're going to move into oxalates next. So like I mentioned before, oxalates are an anti-nutrient. So an oxalate is a crystalline compound naturally occurring in fruits and vegetables. This compound naturally binds to calcium, phosphorus, and cysteine while in the kidneys. So they can also be detrimental in overall health of the kidneys and liver, all while being especially hard for our bodies to remove. So much like linoleic acid, it can take a long time for our bodies to remove oxalates that have been stored up in our bodies. So it usually takes over a year to completely remove oxalates from our bodies. And where our bodies store them is going to be in like our joints, connective tissue, kidneys, and liver. So high oxalate levels are a source of chronic inflammation in our bodies, among other just common health issues. So I'll go through a bunch of diseases or dysfunction that could be associated with oxalates or high levels of oxalates in our bodies. So we're talking about kidney stones. That's going to be like the number one that sticks out. Cataracts, breast cancer, pulmonary fibrosis, fibromyalgia, endometriosis, uterine fibroids, PCOS, thyroid dysfunction, cysts, arthritis, osteopenia, osteoporosis, vertigo, diverticulitis, and others. Those are kind of the main ones, though. So oxalate dumping, we're going to go over that term. Now, there are many reasons to lower and limit our oxalate consumption. However, it is important that you don't cold turkey quit oxalates. If you eat high oxalate containing foods daily and have been doing so for more than like a month or two, it is extremely likely that your cells have now become saturated with oxalates. And like I mentioned before, it can take over a year to dump stored up oxalates, and it's a tedious process. So if we quit cold turkey and dump too fast, you can go through a variety of side effects, including joint pain, painful urination, excessive urination, burning with bowel movements, cloudy urine, skin rashes, brain fog, eye pain, insomnia, anxiety, and depression. So it is important to slowly start limiting your oxalate intake to avoid these nasty side effects. Let's talk about oxalates and kidney stones. So, common form of kidney stones is a calcium oxalate kidney stone. This is when the oxalate compound binds to calcium in the kidneys. This can happen often during a diet that is high in oxalates and calcium. Although I recommend simply trying to stay away from foods that are high in oxalates, one way to combat oxalate absorption and prevent oxalates from binding to calcium is to add in additional magnesium. So specifically magnesium citrate, if you add that in with a meal, that's going to contain oxalates. That's a good way to kind of counteract. So let's go over some examples of foods that contain medium to high levels of oxalates. So high oxalate vegetables, I'll break those down. I'm going to go through them really quick here. So asparagus, broccoli, cauliflower, celery, beet leaves, beetroot, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, chicory, chives, endive, leek, lettuce, parsley, spinach, turnip, watercress, carrot, cassava root, parsnip, potato, radish, rutabaga, sweet potato, garlic, and onion. High oxalate fruits would be bitter melon, avocado, date, figs, grapefruit, kiwi, orange, pineapple, raspberries, blackberries, blueberries, strawberries, blackberries, green gooseberries, papaya, grapes, lemon peel, lime peel, rhubarb, cucumber, eggplant, pepper, tomato. So the fruits and the vegetables that I just went over, those are going to be more of like a mid to high amount of oxalate. So those are going to be present. If you're looking for a fruit that's going to be lower in oxalates, blueberries are going to be really good. That's why those are one of my go-tos. I'm trying to think what else. Cucumber is going to be pretty low. And as long as the orange, you're staying away from like the peel and the, I don't know if it's called like the brine, whatever, like the white stuff on the outside after you peel. If you can get rid of most of that and just focus on like the juicy stuff on the inside of the orange, that's going to be best for you. Moving on to high oxalate grains, we've got barley grass, brown rice, buckwheat, wheat that's bleached, corn starch, popcorn, high fructose corn syrup, oats, quinoa, rye, white rice, and wild rice. And then high oxalate legumes, basically any sort of bean is going to contain oxalates. That includes soy and peas as well. And then high oxalate nuts, you got almonds, cashews, hazelnuts, macadamia, peanuts, pecans, pine, pistachio, walnuts, and chocolate. So the worst offenders for being really high in oxalates are spinach, Swiss chard, beets and beet greens, rhubarb, parsley, and chocolate. Rhubarb is actually the worst one on the list. And typically rhubarb is just kind of like eaten in desserts. It's sweet. However, it's like contains a horribly high amount of oxalates. And the other one I was really sad to learn about was chocolate. And I'll go over that in a second here. So my oxalate story time. So at one point in time, this was like within the past year and a half, I had made the switch to dark chocolate, thinking it was an overall healthy option compared to milk chocolate. Typically, dark chocolate has less additives than milk chocolate does. However, unknown to me, a lot of these dark chocolates were being contaminated with heavy metals, like high amounts. So that's not great. But anyway, so I started to buy dark chocolate baking chips from the brands like Beyond Good and Hu, which is HU. And I made a bunch of like nut-covered chocolate treats. So I made a bunch of these. We'd produce these and then freeze them and keep them stored in like our freezer. I'd have different containers. We'd move a container into the refrigerator and then they would be like the perfect temperature to just like bite into. They were super tasty. Basically, I switched off between using walnuts, cashews, peanuts, natural peanut butter, and macadamia nuts. And for me, I was eating one or two of these chocolate treats every day for like months on end, not thinking that there would be any issues. I was eating dark chocolate. I thought at the time that nuts would be okay. And then after a couple months of this, I developed a cyst in my left knee. And I just noticed like I was like feeling more achy in my joints. So after I noticed the cyst, I saw my doctor, but they didn't have any idea why I developed the cyst. So I started doing some more digging on my own and looked into my recent dietary changes over the past months. And I had realized that, most of my diet hadn't changed. I was still eating mostly meat. I was having definitely more starches in grains than I do now back then, but that hadn't changed. That was consistent. The one thing in my diet that had changed is I was having a lot more dark chocolate and I was eating a lot more nuts. And I started noticing that nuts were upsetting my stomach. And I've noticed this with other people too. As soon as they start kind of like removing nuts from their diet, they feel better. That happened to my mom. But at one point, so last December, I was eating like pistachio nuts almost every night. It was just kind of like a nice little thing to do. I'd wind down, watch TV, crack open some pistachio nuts, and good to go. But then I was eating nuts like super consistently because of these treats, getting a lot of chocolate in, and I realized that those were containing high amounts of oxalates, plus I was eating a lot of it. So I put two and two together, and it made sense why I had developed the cyst at the time I did. And like I mentioned before, oxalates get stored in our connective tissue. And that was one of the, when I listed all of the like diseases or dysfunctions earlier, cyst development was one of them. So I had known about oxalates prior to that, but I hadn't done a ton of research on them. So that kind of led me into a deep dive on oxalates. So after that, I started limiting my intake and started, driving it down. I still kind of consumed chocolate, but I removed the nuts. So I stopped using the nuts. Started to pay attention to which fruits specifically had higher oxalate levels. I wasn't eating a ton of vegetables then either, so it was mostly like the fruits where I was getting those in. And then just kind of slowly started reducing my chocolate intake. So I still feel like I'm probably still currently dumping oxalates from my body, but I have noticed a substantial improvement in how my joints are feeling. And then my cyst has also decreased in size, which is awesome. So it started decreasing in size this summer. And then, like I've said, I've since removed nuts completely from my diet. And then I do have chocolate every now and then. I know that I can kind of fit that in there. I love chocolate, and it was hard for me to start like removing it from my diet, but I did notice pretty drastic improvement on how my body feels off of chocolate. So when I do have dark chocolate now, I notice a difference in how my body feels, especially if I'm getting in like a bigger dose of it. Little amounts of chocolate here and there, typically I don't notice any huge differences in my body. If you have the resources to do so, you can get a genetic test, which would be helpful in finding out how your body handles oxalates. So specifically the production of enzymes that aid in the breakdown and removal of oxalates. I mean, in general, I think genetic tests are super helpful. And once you have one of those done, then you can start pinpointing, deficiencies in certain genetic areas. So that goes in a lot more as far as like different areas than just oxalates. There's so much out there that you can learn from genetic tests. So definitely would encourage you guys to do that if you have the means to do that. Another thing you can do is you can also take a urinary organic acid test to determine your levels of accumulated oxalates. So that's an option as well if you are interested in testing yourself. But that's basically it on oxalates. I know I kind of sped through that one, but definitely something to keep in mind when you guys are eating and grocery shopping, especially like meal prepping as well. Keep in mind that like phytic acid, oxalates also bind to minerals. So they can also steal the absorption of minerals from your digestive system. So that's not great. And overall, I think it's something that we should definitely be conscious of as we're preparing food and as we're consuming food. So that's going to be it on oxalates today. If you guys have any more questions on those, feel free to let me know. And like I mentioned at the beginning, if you guys have started to make some adjustments to your diet, let me know. I am super excited and happy to hear about that. So keep them coming. I appreciate it. So we still have more areas to cover in regards to things that we need to look out for in our food. We're going to talk about glyphosate still. We're going to talk about deuterium, lectins. And once we got like all of those things covered, then we can move on to more in-depth information on the food groups, which I'm super excited about. And also, I just wanted to apologize for the volume or the scratchiness of my voice. I did accidentally switch a setting in my microphone, so if I do seem louder or scratchier than normal, that's why. I'll definitely have that straightened out for next time. Once again, thanks for tuning in to the Druber Health Podcast. I'll see you all next week.